If you're enjoying these stories, you can support us on Patreon. There are several unique stories over there that I haven't uploaded to YouTube. Please consider supporting me on Patreon if you can. Now, let's get into the story. The Tragedy of the Atkinson Brothers. In reviewing my notebooks detailing the long and varied career of my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I find that the vast majority of our adventures took place within the fog-bound streets of London or the damp, isolated expanses of the English countryside. Yet there was a period, shortly before the profound matters that culminated in the affair of the King of Bohemia, where circumstances necessitated our presence in climes far removed from the familiar glow of the Baker Street gas lamps. It was in the early days of April that we found ourselves upon the eastern coast of Ceylon, in the historic port town of Trincomalee. Holmes had lately concluded a delicate investigation for the Netherlands Sumatra Company, a case which had taxed his iron constitution to its very limits. At the urging of a grateful corporate director, and upon my own strict medical insistence, we had taken a steamer to Ceylon to allow my friend a fortnight of tropical convalescence. The sweltering heat of the Indian Ocean, however, proved a poor substitute for the intellectual stimulation Holmes craved. He spent his days draped over a rattan chair on the veranda of our rented bungalow, enveloped in a cloud of rank local tobacco smoke, staring out at the azure waters of the great natural harbour with an expression of profound ennui. His long, thin fingers played restlessly with a silver sovereign case, and he had entirely abandoned the local newspapers, declaring them devoid of anything but the petty squabbles of tea planters and the shipping schedules of the Peninsular and Oriental Steam Navigation Company. "It is a paradise, Watson," he muttered one afternoon, waving his cheroot languidly at the swaying fronds of the coconut palms. "A veritable Eden. And like Eden, it is utterly devoid of the complex artificial tragedies that make human existence tolerable. I feel my mind atrophying in this humid tranquillity. If a problem does not present itself soon, I fear I shall be forced to take up the study of local botany, or worse, engage in colonial politics." "Patience, Holmes," I replied, mopping the perspiration from my brow. "Your nervous system requires this respite. A man cannot run an engine at full steam perpetually without a catastrophic failure." "My engine, Watson, is rusting from disuse," he retorted sharply. "I require the friction of a formidable mind, the intricate puzzle of human deceit. This sun only bakes the intellect." It seemed that Providence, or perhaps the dark underbelly of human nature, heard his plea. The following morning, as the sun began its brutal ascent over the Indian Ocean, our quiet bungalow was invaded by a man whose frantic demeanour shattered the tropical languor. He was a tall, heavily built Englishman, perhaps in his late 30s, dressed in a white linen suit that was thoroughly soaked with sweat and stained with the red dust of the Ceylonese roads. His face, tanned by the colonial sun, was presently ash-grey, and his pale blue eyes darted wildly about the veranda before settling upon Holmes. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he gasped, leaning heavily against the wooden railing. "They told me at the club you were residing here. My name is Richard Atkinson. You must help me, sir. In the name of God, you must help me. I am a ruined man, and before the week is out, I fear I shall be a hanged one." Holmes's lethargy vanished in an instant. He sat upright, his eyes gleaming with the sharp, predatory light that I knew so well. He gestured to a wicker chair opposite his own. "Pray, sit down, Mr. Atkinson," Holmes said, his voice calm and soothing. "You are clearly in a state of extreme distress. Watson, a glass of brandy for our guest, if you please. Now, sir, take a moment to collect yourself. You speak of ruin and the gallows. These are strong words. To what do they refer?" Richard Atkinson took the glass I offered with trembling hands and downed the spirit in a single gulp. He drew a ragged breath and leaned forward. "I speak of my brother, Mr. Holmes, Thomas, my elder brother and my partner in all things. He is gone, vanished into thin air, leaving behind a locked room, a shattered safe, and a mystery that has utterly baffled the local constabulary. Worse still, Inspector Sterling, the colonial officer in charge, has convinced himself that I have murdered Thomas and concealed his body to cover up a financial discrepancy." "A financial discrepancy?" Holmes inquired, pressing his fingertips together. "We are, or rather were, the proprietors of Atkinson and Sons, an import and export firm dealing primarily in Ceylon tea, spices and fine timber. We have operated out of Trincomalee for the better part of a decade. We share a large estate upon the Ostenburg Ridge. We are bachelors, you see, and entirely devoted to our business and to our shared private passion." "And what passion is that?" "Horology, Mr. Holmes. The study and construction of timepieces. It is a family inheritance. Our grandfather was a master clockmaker in Clerkenwell. Though we pursued commerce for our livelihood, our true joy lay in the intricate mechanics of gears, mainsprings and escapements. Our home is practically a museum of clocks. Grandfather clocks, mantel clocks, marine chronometers, intricate automaton pieces from the continent. We collect them, repair them, and even build them from scratch." Holmes leaned forward, his interest visibly piqued. "Fascinating. Pray, continue. Give me the exact sequence of events that led to your current predicament." Atkinson wiped his brow with the silk handkerchief. 3 nights ago, on the 2nd of April, Thomas and I retired to our respective quarters after a rather heated argument. The business, I had recently discovered, was suffering. We had missed 2 consecutive shipments to London, and our creditors were sending increasingly urgent telegrams. Thomas handled all the finances. When I pressed him for the ledgers, he became highly defensive. He told me he would balance the books that evening and show me the exact state of affairs in the morning. He took the ledgers to his private study? Yes, a room situated at the far end of the eastern wing. It is his sanctum, housing the safe and the finest pieces of our horological collection. There must be over 40 clocks in that room alone. He locked the door behind him. It is a heavy teak door with a sturdy brass lock, the key to which he always kept on his watch chain. And the windows? There is but one window, barred with iron on the outside, to prevent the intrusion of local thieves or wild macaque monkeys, as is common here. I see. Proceed. The following morning I awoke and went down to breakfast. Thomas did not appear. By 10 o'clock I grew concerned. I knocked upon his study door, but there was no answer. I called out. Silence. Fearing he had suffered a medical turn, he is a man of stout proportion and choleric temper, I summoned the estate manager, a burly Scotsman named McIntyre. Together we put our shoulders to the door and forced it open. Atkinson paused, his hands shaking once more. He buried his face in his hands for a moment before looking up, his eyes wide with remembered horror. The room was entirely empty of my brother, Mr. Holmes. But that was not the strangest part. The room was deafening. Every single clock in that room, all 42 of them, which Thomas meticulously kept wound and synchronized, had stopped ticking. No, that is inaccurate. They had not stopped. They had been deliberately arrested, and every single clock face, from the grandest long case to the smallest carriage clock, was set to exactly 3:15. Holmes's eyebrows rose. 3:15 in the morning, I presume. Indeed. But there is more. The heavy iron safe in the corner stood wide open. Inside, our financial ledgers, the very books that contained the entire record of Atkinson and Sons, were utterly destroyed. They had not been burned by fire, but reduced to a blackened smoking sludge by some highly corrosive acid. The stench in the room was unbearable, a sharp, biting chemical odour that burned the nose and throat. "And the vessel that contained this acid?" Holmes asked, his eyes gleaming. "Shattered. There were shards of thin, curved glass scattered across the top of the safe and upon the ruined ledgers." "Were the shards swept up or removed?" "No, sir. The local police, under Inspector Sterling, immediately locked the room and posted a guard. Sterling arrived, examined the scene, and immediately concluded that I was the author of the destruction. He posits that I murdered my brother during our argument, disposed of his body in the jungle or the harbour, poured acid upon the ledgers to hide my own embezzlement of the firm's funds, and staged the locked room to throw off suspicion. He claims I locked the door from the outside using some trick, though he cannot explain how." "And the clocks?" I interjected. "What is the inspector's theory regarding the clocks?" Atkinson let out a bitter, desperate laugh. He dismisses them entirely as the eccentric ravings of a guilty man. He says I set them to 3:15 to establish a false time of death, a time when the house servants can attest I was safely in my bed. He has confined me to my quarters under house arrest, and I have only managed to slip away this morning by bribing a sentry. Mr. Holmes, I swear to you on my mother's grave, I did not harm my brother. I know nothing of where he has gone, nor how a locked room could be vacated, nor why every clock was set to that exact minute. If you do not uncover the truth, Sterling will see me hang." Holmes sprang from his chair, his lethargy completely evaporated. He paced the veranda with long, rapid strides, rubbing his hands together with a fierce energy. "Excellent!" he cried. "Utterly singular and profoundly grotesque. A locked room, a vanished man, acid-ruined ledgers, and a symphony of synchronized timepieces. My dear Watson, the Celanese sun has finally baked something of supreme interest. Mr. Atkinson, you may put your mind at ease. If your brother was murdered, I shall find his killer. If he is alive, I shall find him. Watson, my hat and stick. We are bound for the Ostenburg Ridge." Within the hour, a hired carriage was carrying us up the winding, dusty roads that led away from the bustling port of Trincomalee. The air grew slightly cooler as we ascended the ridge, the dense canopy of teak and mahogany trees providing shade from the relentless sun. Through gaps in the foliage we caught breathtaking glimpses of the vast blue harbour below, dotted with the white sails of local dhows and the dark smoking funnels of British merchant vessels. We arrived at the Atkinson estate, a sprawling colonial bungalow surrounded by manicured lawns and vibrant bougainvillea. At the front steps stood a man in the khaki uniform of the colonial police. He was a red-faced, thick-necked individual with a bristling moustache and an air of entrenched obstinacy. "Inspector Sterling, I presume?" Holmes said, stepping down from the carriage. The inspector scowled, looking from Holmes to Richard Atkinson. "Mr. Atkinson, you were ordered to remain in your quarters. Breaking your parole will not look favourably upon you at the magistrate's inquiry. And who, may I ask, are you, gentlemen?" "My name is Sherlock Holmes. This is my colleague, Dr. Watson. Mr. Atkinson has retained my services to look into the disappearance of his brother." Sterling let out a derisive snort. "Sherlock Holmes, eh? The London amateur. Well, Mr. Holmes, you are a long way from Scotland Yard. We handle matters practically in the colonies. The case is exceedingly simple. One brother is dead, the other is desperate. The books were cooked, an argument ensued, murder was done. We will find Thomas Atkinson's body rotting in the mangroves before the week is out, and this man will face the Crown's justice." "A beautifully concise theory, Inspector," Holmes murmured, producing his magnifying glass from his waistcoat pocket. "But perhaps a trifle premature, considering the corpse is missing, and the mechanics of the locked room remain unexplained." "Locked room nonsense," Sterling scoffed. "A string, a pin, a clever turn of a key from the outside. Criminals do it all the time." "Indeed, and the synchronization of 42 clocks?" "A theatrical distraction," the inspector declared firmly. "Smoke and mirrors to confuse simple native constables. It won't work on me." "I am sure nothing escapes your keen eye, Inspector," Holmes replied smoothly, though I caught the subtle mocking glint in his eye. "Nevertheless, as I am here, I would be much obliged if you would allow me a few moments to examine the study." Sterling hesitated, then shrugged his heavy shoulders. "Do as you please, Mr. Holmes. It will not change the facts. But do not touch the evidence." We were led through the airy, high-ceilinged corridors of the bungalow. The house was a testament to the brothers' obsession. In every hallway, parlour and vestibule, timepieces ticked away in a cacophonous harmony. There were elegant French mantel clocks adorned with gilded nymphs, stoic English grandfather clocks marking the seconds with heavy solemn thuds, and intricate German cuckoo clocks waiting to announce the hour. We reached the end of the eastern wing. The heavy teak door of the study stood open, guarded by a native policeman who snapped to attention as we approached. "The door was forced by Mr. Atkinson and his manager," Sterling noted, pointing to the splintered wood around the heavy brass lock. "The key was not found within." Holmes dropped to his knees, closely examining the broken lock, the floorboards and the hinges. "The bolt was certainly thrown from the inside," he muttered, "and the gap beneath the door is barely sufficient to slip a shilling through, let alone employ the string and key contrivance you mentioned, Inspector." He rose and stepped into the room, Watson and I following closely behind. It was a large square chamber, its walls lined with mahogany shelves and glass-fronted cabinets. The air was thick and foul, carrying the sharp metallic tang of strong chemical corrosion. The single window opposite the door was tightly shut and secured with heavy iron bars bolted into the masonry. But it was the visual spectacle of the room that arrested the senses. Everywhere one looked there were clocks. They sat upon desks, crowded the shelves, and stood like silent sentinels in the corners. And true to Richard Atkinson's word, every single one of them was dead, their brass and steel hands frozen uniformly at the hour of 3:15. In the corner of the room stood a massive iron safe. Its heavy door swung ajar. Inside, the metal shelving was severely stained and pitted. A pile of large leather-bound ledgers lay in ruins. The paper had been eaten away into a charred, bubbling mass, the ink entirely dissolved. Scattered across the top of the safe and among the ruined books were fragments of exceedingly thin, curved glass. Holmes approached the safe, his face a mask of absolute concentration. He did not touch the ruined books, but bent low, sniffing the air cautiously. "Nitric and hydrochloric acids," he murmured. "Aqua regia, the royal water, exceedingly corrosive, capable of dissolving even gold. It would make short work of paper and iron gall ink, an effective if dramatic method of erasing one's financial history." "The act of a desperate embezzler, Mr. Holmes," Sterling said from the doorway. "Richard Atkinson poured the acid to hide his theft." Holmes ignored him. He produced a pair of tweezers and carefully picked up one of the glass shards. He held it up to the light of the window. "Remarkable," he whispered. "Watson, observe this glass. It is not the glass of a window pane, nor the sturdy glass of a chemical beaker. What does this suggest to you?" I stepped closer, squinting at the fragment. "It is exceedingly thin, Holmes, almost like the glass of a delicate Christmas bauble or a blown glass ornament." "Precisely," Holmes said, his eyes flashing. "A bespoke vessel, blown exceedingly thin." "Why?" "To contain a highly corrosive acid, one usually requires a sturdy, thick-walled container. Why employ a vessel so fragile that a mere tap would shatter it?" Before I could answer, Holmes turned his attention to the clocks. He moved from one to another, examining their faces, their escapements, and their internal mechanisms with the reverence of a high priest. He paused before a magnificent mahogany long-case clock, its face adorned with a painted moon phase. He opened the glass door and examined the pendulum. "Arrested," he noted. He moved to a French carriage clock. "Mainspring intact. Arrested." He turned to Richard Atkinson, who was hovering nervously in the hallway. "Mr. Atkinson, you stated that your brother kept these clocks meticulously wound. They did not wind down naturally, they were manually stopped. But tell me, do these clocks strike the hour?" "The vast majority of them do, Mr. Holmes," Atkinson replied. "We have quarter strikers, half-hour strikers, and those that chime only on the hour. Many of them are fitted with Westminster or Whittington chimes." "And at 3:15, how many of these clocks would strike?" Atkinson thought for a moment. "At 3:15, the quarter past the hour is reached. At least 30 of the clocks in this room are equipped to chime the first quarter. It is a rather overwhelming sound when they all strike together." "I can well imagine," Holmes said softly. A strange, intense smile played upon his lips. A cacophony of brass and steel gongs, bells and coiled wire chimes, a symphony of resonance. He suddenly dropped to his hands and knees, crawling methodically around the heavy iron safe. He pressed his face almost to the floorboards, examining every crack and crevice with his magnifying glass. After several minutes he sprang to his feet with a triumphant cry, holding up a microscopic flake of some substance on the tip of his finger. "What is it, Holmes?" I asked. "A flake of sealing wax, Watson. Red sealing wax." Inspector Sterling rolled his eyes. "A man who runs a business uses sealing wax, Mr. Holmes. It is hardly a clue." "Ah, but the placement, Inspector. It was found on the floorboard directly beneath the edge of the safe. precisely where a plummeting object might strike. "And look here." Holmes pointed to the top of the safe, just above the ruined ledgers. "There is a corresponding smear of wax on the upper rim of the safe's interior shelf." Holmes stood in the centre of the room, closed his eyes, and began to wave his hands slowly through the air, like an orchestra conductor envisioning a silent symphony. The locked door, the missing man, the fragile glass, the royal water, the red wax, and the silent chorus of 42 clocks frozen at 3:15. "It is brilliant, diabolically brilliant." He opened his eyes and levelled a piercing gaze at Richard Atkinson. "Mr. Atkinson, tell me about your brother Thomas. Was he a man of science? Did he understand physics as well as he understood the gear trains of a clock?" "Thomas was a voracious reader, Mr. Holmes," Atkinson replied, bewildered. "He was particularly fascinated by acoustics. He once spent a month tuning the gongs of a single mantel clock so that its pitch would perfectly match the tone of the temple bells down in the city." "Acoustics!" Holmes cried, clapping his hands together. "Of course. The final piece of the puzzle. Inspector Sterling, I must ask you a question. Have you made any inquiries at the docks regarding vessels that departed Trincomalee on the night of the 2nd of April? Sterling crossed his arms. "I saw no need. The man is dead." "The man is as alive as you or I, Inspector," Holmes countered sharply, "and he is putting a great deal of ocean between himself and the hangman's noose you so eagerly prepare for his brother." "Preposterous!" Sterling sputtered. "How did he leave a locked room? How did he pour the acid?" "He did not leave a locked room, and he did not pour the acid," Holmes stated calmly. "At least not at 3:15 in the morning. Come, Watson, we have work to do in the town. Mr. Atkinson, remain of good cheer. I believe we shall have this matter resolved before the sun sets." Leaving the bewildered inspector and the relieved brother behind, Holmes and I commandeered the carriage and drove swiftly back down the ridge to the sweltering port town of Trincomalee. Holmes was in a state of high, feverish energy, his mind racing ahead of our physical progress. "The sheer ingenuity of it, Watson," he marvelled as we rattled over the cobblestones. "We are dealing with the criminal of exceptional intellect. Thomas Atkinson embezzled the firm's funds, likely over a period of years, given the impending ruin of the company. When his brother finally demanded the ledgers, Thomas knew his time was up. He needed to destroy the evidence of his theft, but he also required a head start to escape the island. He needed an alibi." "An alibi?" I asked. "But he is the prime suspect." "Only because his brother forced the door," Holmes corrected. "Thomas intended for the destruction of the ledgers to occur at 3:15 in the morning, a time when the entire household was asleep. By the time the acid was discovered, he would be far away." "But how did he destroy them if he was not in the room?" "That is what we must prove," Holmes said, his eyes glittering. "Our first stop was the harbour-master's office. A few shillings, and Holmes's authoritative manner produced the shipping logs for the night of April the 2nd. "Ah," Holmes said, tracing his long finger down the ledger. "Here we are. A merchant steamer bound for Madras departed at the stroke of midnight, 3 hours and 15 minutes before the clocks in the study were set to strike. Watson, I wager my favourite pipe that a gentleman answering Thomas Atkinson's description boarded that vessel, likely under an assumed name." Our next destination was the telegraph office. Holmes spent several minutes drafting a lengthy and highly detailed wire addressed to the Chief of Constabulary in Madras. He paid the clerk handsomely to ensure its immediate transmission. "And now, Watson," Holmes said, rubbing his hands together as we stepped back out into the blazing sun, "we must procure a few items for a scientific demonstration. I require a glass blower and a tuning fork." It took an hour of searching the narrow, aromatic alleys of the bazaar, amidst the scent of cardamom and drying fish, to locate a local artisan capable of meeting Holmes's precise specifications. Holmes communicated his needs through a mixture of broken Tamil and expressive gestures. He requested a glass vial, spherical in shape, blown so astonishingly thin that it was little more than a hardened bubble. Next, we visited a local music merchant, from whom Holmes purchased a standard steel tuning fork. Armed with these peculiar instruments, we returned to the Atkinson estate on the Ostenburg Ridge. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long dramatic shadows across the manicured lawns. Inspector Sterling was pacing the veranda, looking thoroughly irritable. "Well, Mr. Holmes," the inspector barked, "have you returned from your wild goose chase? Shall I fetch the handcuffs for Richard Atkinson now?" "You may keep your irons in your pocket, Inspector," Holmes replied cheerfully. "But I would ask you to accompany Dr. Watson, Mr. Atkinson, and myself to the study. I am about to illuminate the darkness of this locked-room mystery." We gathered once more in the oppressive, acid-scented chamber. The 42 clocks stood silent, their hands forever indicating 3:15. "Gentlemen," Holmes began, standing in the centre of the room with the flair of a university professor, "the mystery of this room rests upon a fundamental misunderstanding of time and sequence. Inspector Sterling believed that a murder occurred here, and the scene was staged. Richard Atkinson believed his brother vanished into thin air. Both theories are incorrect." Holmes walked over to the ruined safe. "Let us reconstruct the actions of Thomas Atkinson on the night of April the 2nd. He knows he must flee. He knows he must destroy the ledgers to hide his embezzlement. But to pour the acid and simply run would trigger an immediate alarm. The smell, the smoke, it would rouse the house. He needed a delayed mechanism, a fuse." "A fuse made of glass and acid?" I asked, bewildered. "Precisely, Watson. Thomas Atkinson took a vial, blown exceedingly thin, just like the fragments we found, and just like the one I hold in my hand." Holmes produced the delicate glass bubble we had procured in the bazaar. He filled it with aqua regia. He then sealed it, likely with a cork, and the red sealing wax we found upon the floor and the safe. Holmes carefully balanced the empty glass vial upon the top rim of the open safe, directly above the ruined ledgers. He poised the vial here, a precarious position. But what was to tip it over? What was to break it at the precise hour of 3:15? Holmes turned to the silent multitude of clocks. Thomas Atkinson was a master horologist and a student of acoustics. He understood the scientific principle of resonant frequency. Every physical object, Watson, has a natural frequency at which it vibrates. If you expose that object to a sound wave of the exact same frequency, it will absorb the acoustic energy and begin to vibrate sympathetically. If the object is rigid and fragile, like exceedingly thin glass, and the sound is loud enough, the vibrations will cause the object to shatter. Richard Atkinson gasped, stepping forward. The chimes. "Exactly!" Holmes cried. Thomas knew the precise resonant frequency of the bespoke glass vial he had crafted. He then spent hours, perhaps days, tuning the chimes, gongs and bells of these 42 clocks to match that specific frequency. It is a monumental task, but entirely possible for a man of his skill. Holmes picked up the tuning fork. "Allow me to demonstrate the principle, though on a much smaller scale." He struck the tuning fork against his heel. It emitted a clear, high-pitched hum. He held it close to the thin glass vial balanced on the safe. Nothing happened. "The frequency of this fork does not match the glass," Holmes explained, "and the amplitude, the volume, is insufficient. But imagine, gentlemen, 30 clocks. 30 heavy brass gongs, coiled steel wires and bronze bells, all tuned to the precise resonant pitch of that fragile glass bubble. And imagine them all striking at the exact same fraction of a second." Holmes walked around the room, manually winding the mainsprings of half a dozen clocks, adjusting their hands so they sat precisely at 14 minutes past 3. Thomas Atkinson set his trap. He placed the acid-filled vial. He wound the clocks and synchronized them perfectly. He then walked out of this room, pulling the door shut behind him. "But the door was locked from the inside," Sterling protested. "A child's trick for a man of mechanical genius," Holmes dismissed. He threw the bolt using a pair of long, thin, needle-nose pliers inserted through the keyhole, gripping the internal mechanism and turning it before withdrawing the tool. A common burglar's trick, entirely within the skill set of a clockmaker. The key he took with him. Holmes stood back, checking his pocket watch. At midnight, Thomas boarded the bound for Madras. He was miles out to sea, safely beyond suspicion. The house slept, the clocks ticked, and then... Suddenly the room was filled with the whirring of gears, as the internal mechanisms of the 6 clocks Holmes had wound prepared to strike. "Listen, gentlemen," Holmes commanded. The Westminster chimes began. It was only 6 clocks, not 30, and they were not perfectly tuned to the vial, but the sound in the enclosed space was incredibly loud, a discordant, vibrating wave of acoustic energy that vibrated in the chest and set one's teeth on edge. "At 3:15 in the morning," Holmes shouted over the din, "the acoustic standing wave in this room reached its maximum amplitude. The sound waves battered the thin glass vial. The glass vibrated sympathetically, violently, until..." Holmes reached out and sharply flicked the glass vial with his finger. It shattered instantly, raining delicate curved shards down onto the ledgers below. "The vial shatters," Holmes concluded, as the chimes faded into a ringing silence. "The aqua regia pours down upon the ledgers. The acid takes hours to fully consume the thick leather and paper. By the time the smoke and stench alert the household the next morning, the financial records are destroyed, the room is locked from the inside, and Thomas Atkinson is gone, leaving his innocent brother to face the wrath of the company's creditors and the suspicion of the police." The room was deathly quiet, save for the heavy breathing of Inspector Sterling. Richard Atkinson had sunk into a chair, his face buried in his hands, weeping openly with relief. It is a fantastical tale, Mr. Holmes," Sterling stammered, his face redder than ever. "A theory of sound and glass. It is clever, I grant you, but it is not proof in a court of law. Where is Thomas Atkinson?" As if on cue, the heavy footsteps of the native policeman echoed in the hallway. he appeared in the doorway, clutching a yellow telegraph envelope. "Message for the English detective," the policeman announced. Holmes took the envelope, tore it open, and quickly scanned the contents. A broad smile spread across his sharp features. He handed the paper to Inspector Sterling. "I believe this constitutes your proof, Inspector," Holmes said softly. Sterling read the telegram aloud, his voice dropping in volume with every word. Sterling slowly lowered the paper, staring at Holmes with a mixture of profound embarrassment and grudging awe. "It seems, Mr. Holmes," the inspector managed to say, "that I owe you an apology. And you, Mr. Atkinson. I have been a fool. We are all fools in the face of a truly devious mind, Inspector." Holmes replied graciously, though he could not entirely hide his satisfaction. "I suggest you arrange for Mr. Atkinson's immediate release from his house arrest and prepare the necessary warrants for his brother's return to Ceylon." Later that evening, as the tropical night descended over Trincomalee, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and fiery orange, Holmes and I sat once more upon the veranda of our rented bungalow. The oppressive heat of the day had given way to a gentle, cooling sea breeze. Holmes was reclining in his rattan chair, puffing contentedly upon his cheroot, the very picture of relaxed satisfaction. The lethargy that had plagued him for days was entirely gone, replaced by the quiet hum of a perfectly tuned engine that had just completed a long and successful journey. "A fascinating study in the misdirection of energy, Watson," Holmes mused, watching the smoke ring drift towards the ceiling. "Thomas Atkinson used the kinetic energy of clockwork to generate acoustic energy, which in turn released chemical energy to destroy the evidence of his crimes. It is a veritable textbook of applied physics." "It was a brilliant deduction, Holmes," I said, pouring us both a generous measure of brandy. "To look at a shattered glass and a stopped clock and see an acoustic trigger. The clues were there, Watson, singing their song to anyone who cared to listen. The extreme thinness of the glass was the anomaly. In any investigation, the anomaly is the key. Once I deduced that the glass was meant to be shattered without physical impact, the presence of 42 chiming clocks provided the obvious, if extraordinary, mechanism." "And the specific time? 3:15? "A matter of calculated delay," Holmes replied. "He needed time to board his ship and ensure it had sailed. Furthermore, 3:15 is the quarter hour. It ensures the maximum number of chimes are engaged simultaneously. The hour strike, the quarter chimes, the various gongs. It produced the maximum acoustic amplitude required to shatter his bespoke vial." I took a sip of my brandy, savouring the warmth. "It is a tragic affair for Richard Atkinson. To be betrayed by his own flesh and blood, left to face ruin and a false charge of murder. Human nature is a dark and tangled forest, Watson," Holmes said softly, his eyes reflecting the distant twinkling lights of the harbour ships. "When greed takes root, it chokes out the most fundamental bonds of brotherhood. Thomas Atkinson possessed a brilliant mind, but a corrupted soul. He applied the precision of a horologist to the art of betrayal." He tapped his pipe against the railing, the embers falling like tiny shooting stars into the dark garden below. "But we have wound his mainspring too tight, Watson. His escape is arrested, and tomorrow I believe I shall finally be able to endure the tranquillity of this island, knowing that the mechanics of justice have been properly calibrated." And with that, my friend leaned back, closed his eyes, and allowed the gentle rhythm of the Ceylonese night to wash over him, a man completely at peace until the next puzzle presented itself to his insatiable mind. Thank you for watching. Before you go, don't forget to check out our Patreon.